Anyone who's seen us struggle with sentient cars, mummified kickboxers, or Tom Clancy's tweaked out terrorist guards will understand we're quite partial to a good, bad game. Naturally, we've focused a lot on titles from previous console generations in our Worst Games Ever series, which you can find on our channel, by the way, subtle plug. But, and I hope you're sitting down for this bombshell revelation, new games are coming out all the time, and some of those are also absolute toilet. Whether it's a shoddily designed mess, a license that had no reason to exist, or literally last year's game with a new title, publishers are constantly finding new ways to piss in our cornflakes. For the sake of fairness, and to avoid the temptation to put something rather controversial in here, literally just to piss people off, we've used Metacritic's rankings from the year of 2019. Thank you very much for that, by the way, Metacritic. So we can be sure that they're considered by critics to be real dog plops. For multi-platform games, we've picked the one with the lowest review score of them all. We've also stuck to Metacritic's stipulation of needing 7 or more reviews for the games to count, mostly to weed out the huge steaming pile of awful Steam asset flips. But of course, all we've taken from Metacritic, unless otherwise stated, is the review score itself, and all thoughts expressed about these bargain bin dwellers are our own. And oh boy, do we have a few. I'm Peter from TripleJump, and here are the 10 worst reviewed games of 2019. Number 10, NARCOS, Rise of the Cartel, PC 45%. In November last year, there was a notable marketing push for this turn-based strategy title, but nowhere in any of the adverts was it explained exactly why they felt the need to slap a license for a highly rated series about the 1980s Colombian cocaine trade onto a blatant XCOM clone. In a way, the choice to go with the strategy genre for this IP is to be applauded when so many cheap TV tie-ins were just plump for the generic shooter template, but it's also a completely baffling decision. NARCOS somehow managed to be both uninspired in its level of imitation and include terrible decisions with the few gameplay changes they did make to the XCOM format. First off, you're only able to move one unit per turn, which means half your team get left behind in most fights. The AI is frustratingly defensive and tedious, the models are mostly dull reskins, and if a unit that does resemble a character from the show happens to get killed, it's an instant game over. Brilliant. Wouldn't want too many deaths in our game about murderous drug cartels, now would we? I think PC Gamer said it best when they asked, why aren't I just playing XCOM instead? Number 9, Generation Zero, PS4 45%. This one's a bit of a surprise anomaly for Swedish developers Avalanche Studios. The team behind some respectable and often high-quality open worlds such as Just Cause, Mad Max, and The Hunter Call of the Wild missed the mark quite drastically with their self-published title Generation Zero. This desolate survival experience started with a lot of promise, setting you up as a young adult that returns from an island excursion to a 1980s Sweden to find that everyone's just gone, and that the only signs of life are a bunch of aggressive robots. The problem was that when first released, playing the game felt just as bleak and devoid of any life. It was accurate to the concept, we guess, but you can still have a wasteland-based game without, being crap. This world lacked the environmental cues of games like Fallout, but also didn't offer compelling survival gameplay as seen in titles like Rust or Ark. It basically boiled down to shooting and looting robots, rinse and repeat. The big mystery wasn't even explained in any clear or meaningful way either, which was a real waste of potential. Although we should say there have been regular updates since launch, so hopefully the Just Cause veterans can salvage something from this wreckage in time. Number 8, Submersed, PS4, 44%. What's more terrifying than being stuck in shark-infested waters in a clunky old diving suit? Experiencing exactly that, but through the medium of what feels like early PS3 era shovelware. There is a way to make retro 3D graphics work well in a horror setting, but this deep-sea disaster is not the way to do it. Believe it or not, Submersed was released in July July of 2019, but everything about it looks and feels dated, from the clumsy AI to the hackneyed horror tropes, poorly executed puzzles, and the inventory system with only 8 slots that seem to actively despise you for using it. Now, the concept of shark-based spookery is fine on paper, but it's like they looked at Jaws' dated animatronics, ignored the rest of the movie's fantastic tense cinematography, and thought, that's what we need for our first scripted encounter with the big bad sea chomper. Although we'll admit it does look hilarious to dismiss one of the bitey Bruces with your electric prod. That's right, stay in the naughty corner and don't question our use of electrically charged weapons in an underwater setting ever again. We would say this title is the Sharknado of the aquatic game world, but at least that movie had some moments of fun. Number 7. FIFA 20 Legacy Edition. Nintendo Switch, 43%. Many people look at EA's yearly football franchise and scoff at the practice, calling each iteration a bare minimum upgrade with just a few updated team lineups. Now, while that's clearly an exaggeration for what is, for most people's money, the best digital emulation of ball kickery out there, the Nintendo Switch version of FIFA 20 was actually that. A shameless reskin of last year's FIFA 19, almost cynically named Legacy Edition. Or in other words, the we couldn't be arsed, so here's last year's game with a $49.99 price tag edition. None of the real FIFA 20's notable changes are present in the Switch version, including the much-hyped Volta mode, which was advertised on the game's trailers, for goodness sake. Many Ultimate Team features were missing too, and even seemingly simple updates like custom house rules are also absent. The game's Amazon listing, since updated to sound a little less savage, first described it as the, quote, same gameplay innovation from FIFA 19 without any new development or significant enhancements. Oh, ouch. All I can say is I look forward to the day when all this annual rehashing behaviour comes to an end. As Nintendo Life put it, this can't Coutinho happening. Frankly, that pun might be the best thing to come out of this blatant insult to fans everywhere. Number 6. WWE 2K20 PS4 42%. Yeah, you knew this was coming. The long-running wrestling series had an absolute shocker of a year, and you've probably seen the countless memes even if you have no interest in sweaty grapples whatsoever. When veteran 2K developers Yuke stepped away and handed over the reins to NBA 2K studio Visual Concepts, none of us were prepared for what would come of it. Significant graphical downgrades were just the tip of the iceberg. Terrible animations, unnecessary control changes, a main story mode with incomprehensibly bad writing and loathsome protagonists.
That's right! I'm gonna give your grandmother bed sores! What is wrong with you?
And then there's the glitches. Oh sweet unholy undertaker, the glitches. Broken textures that cause nightmare-inducing fleshy monstrosities, tattoos crashing the game, bizarre body contortions and slapstick animations, ropes that are possessed by the devil. Honestly, there are so many horrific yet hilarious bugs, we don't know whether to laugh or cry. And somehow, 2K are still having problems. On the 1st of January 2020, a coding error caused the game to consistently crash, making 2K20 impossible to play in the year 2K20. It beggars belief. Number 5. Dollhouse PS4 41%. This unnerving horror noir title is a textbook example of how an intriguing concept can be completely butchered by terrible execution. First announced in 2013, Dollhouse takes psychological horror to a very literal level, as you assume the role of an amnesiac detective delving into the recesses of her own mind in search of clues about her past. You'll need to solve puzzles while avoiding evil entities like the Weeping Angel-style mannequins, then find reels of film and edit them together in-game to create a lovely little memory movie. All sounds like prime horror material on paper, right? Well, unfortunately, when all's said and done, the game essentially just boils down to searching for randomly placed collectibles in a procedurally generated map of samey corridors. The developers don't seem to realise that there's a fine line between tension and tedium, and the lack of anything remotely interesting in this game turns the potentially eerie into the dreary. Oh, and if you die, you start all over again, with a completely different layout. Great. An underwhelming story that's poorly placed and the monotonous gameplay are the final nails in this promising idea coffin, and it'll probably leave you wishing for the sweet embrace of amnesia yourself, just so you can forget you ever played it. Number 4, Contra Rogue Core, Nintendo Switch, 40%. Oh, awesome! Contra's back! So, what's the old bullet-blazing jungle runner doing these days? What? They did what? Yes, yet another legendary name from gaming's past has suffered the indignation of an abysmal modern reboot. The change from side-scroller to a hybrid twin-stick shooter isn't an offensive decision in and of itself, but everything else is practically insulting. For starters, the awful repetitive level design recycles bosses like they're on wartime rations. The dialogue is cheesy too. Now, sure, it's a series born from 80s action movies, but it feels like they're trying too hard to pander to an edgy teenage audience who won't know what a Contra even is. Oh, and by panda, we mean a literal panda. There's a panda character. Why is there a panda character? Movement is clunky, shooting is inaccurate, but the biggest sin is the weapon overheating mechanic that forces you to stop shooting in a franchise that was built on non-stop shooting. This so-called Contra title sullied the PS4 and Xbox One, but the Switch version topped them both when it came to bad reviews, with its poor resolution and murky textures. We're so sorry for what they've done to you, Contra. Number 3, Blades of Time, Nintendo Switch, 38%. Bringing back a legendary franchise just to butcher it in front of millions of adoring fans is one thing, but a sadder story is bringing back a completely unremarkable title for the benefit of, well, we're still not exactly sure who. Gaijin Entertainment first released Blades of Time in 2012 on the previous console generation, and it received little fanfare even then. It starred the, and I quote, gorgeous gun-wielding treasure hunter Ayumi, which translates from cynical shovelware speak to lady protagonist with minimal clothing, and amongst the boring predictable button mashing, there was only one interesting feature, the ability to rewind time. But just because one can manipulate time doesn't mean that one should, as I can only assume that's how we ended up with this dated mess in 2019 in the first place, actual time travel. The flow of combat is constantly marred by both terrible framerate issues and intentional game design choices, like long delays after dodging, a dreadful targeting system, and clunky transitions between ranged and melee attacks. Even the time manipulation appropriately slows down the Switch itself to a snail's pace. Worst rewind since... Basically, if you want engaging combo-rich brawling with a cool, sassy female lead that manipulates time, then Blades of Time is absolutely the perfect game to trade in for Bayonetta. Number 2, Left Alive, PS4, 37%. Amazingly, one of the worst games of last year came not from a small indie studio, but from one of the big boys or girls, Square Enix. Yes, that Square Enix. This stealth action with mechs number is technically a sequel in the long-running Front Mission series, the first one in almost 10 years, in fact. With the producer of the Armored Core series, Toshifumi Nabashimi, along with former Metal Gear character designer Yoji Shinkawa both on board during development, it certainly showed promise, but that only added to the disappointment upon seeing that they literally just came up with a poor man's or poor woman's Metal Gear Solid clone. This title dialed back the Front Mission series focus on giant robots with massive guns, although there are still plenty to be found, and put a whole lot of unforgiving, poorly implemented stealth in its place. And when stealth inevitably fails, the combat is even worse, thanks to awkward awkward aiming mechanics, and poor AI. The story also borrows from Metal Gear and its school of hammed-up acting, but at least provides a decent narrative with strong anti-war themes that pull from the series' rich world. But sorry, long-time Front Mission fans, that's about all you're gonna salvage from this train wreck, or mech wreck, if you like, I don't know. And number 1, Eternity, The Last Unicorn, PS4, 36%. Well done, Eternity, for almost single-handedly managing to ruin unicorns for everyone. This woeful action RPG does a lot of things wrong, but the story is something else entirely, supposedly inspired by Norse mythology, even though we're absolutely certain that unicorns aren't remotely related to Viking-era legends.
It all began with the arrival of the elves at Alfheim. 4 unicorns, sacred creatures, were given to the elves by the goddess Morea.
It's like someone blended half a dozen generic fantasy books into a pint glass, downed it in one, and then vomited the resulting mess onto a video game script. Other noteworthy trailer quotes include beings of light, a witch coming from hell, because that's where witches come from, and the elderly scrolls. Oof, I hope someone from Void Studios is keeping an eye on the post for a letter from Bethesda's lawyers. Honestly, I just feel bad for the trailer's voiceover artist, if no one else, who has little to no control over the drivel she has to read out. A bit like if I was forced to say, mystical penis biscuits of Pixieland, or what? I actually really enjoyed Death Stranding. What? The rest of the game feels just as antiquated as the setting, with bog-standard combat that frequently breaks, and a protagonist who likes to ignore her own health bar and just drop dead at random intervals. This and many more issues give Eternity: The Last Unicorn the unenviable award of the worst game of 2019. We just hope this isn't the first and last attempt for the newly formed Void Studios. Just stay away from the elderly scrolls, okay? And there we are, the best worst games from the last year, at least according to Metacritic. I think it's safe to say that they all came together beautifully. But worst games can often be personal and subjective things, we should know, so let us know your own picks for 2019 in the comments below. You can follow myself and TripleJump on Twitter here, and if you want to support the things you enjoy, then check out the rewards on our Patreon. Finally, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. I've been Peter from TripleJump, and thanks for watching.